Thank you, Howard, Kieran, and Pablo, for the countless insights. It was a pleasure hearing your take on the opportunities that COVID crisis has brought us and how technology impacts multiple intelligence theory. Could you imagine the world without the internet? How would the last 2 years have been without it? How many things have changed since its creation? What about education? Could you imagine it not being hybrid? There is no one better to answer these questions than the internet's very own founder, Vinton Cerf, creator of the TCP and IP protocols, co-founder of the Internet Society, and Google's very own chief internet evangelist. Discussing with him today, we have Dio Alcázar Benjumea, CEO of IE University. Vinton and Diego, good afternoon and welcome to EnlightED 2021. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Vinton. Welcome to EnlightED. It's a great pleasure having you here. Many see you as relevant, or even more, as him, as the internet has changed the world. Democratization of the internet has allowed, for example, in this time, 3 billion students in the world have been able to continue studying online during the pandemic. So how do you value your discovery?
Well, first of all, that's very kind for you to say this, but let me remind you that anything on this scale requires a lot of people to contribute to it. And so even in the very earliest stages, I had a colleague, Robert Kahn, and he and I worked very closely together on the design of the system. And it was motivated by the American Defense Department that wanted to figure out how to use computers for command and control. So this was not one of those wake up in the morning with a grand vision as much as it was figure out how to solve this engineering problem. So that's the first point. The second point is, again, that in order for this to happen, and literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and by this time probably millions of people have taken steps to make the internet what it is. And perhaps most important, the World Wide Web, which is the way most people experience the internet today, was not invented by me or Bob Kahn, but by Tim Berners-Lee in 1991, about 18 years after Bob and I started work on the internet. The third point I want to make is that the 3 billion students that you mentioned may have benefited from being online, but I will say that the COVID-19 pandemic forced the use of internet for access to education well beyond the capability of most systems to support this easily and conveniently. So it was, I would say, a very forced and rapid evolution towards remote education. There have been some very good examples, successful examples of this use of the net. The most visible one is at Georgia Tech, which has a master's degree program in electrical engineering. Tens of thousands of people have taken the course. It costs about 1/10 of the course cost if you were a resident on the campus, partly because of the economy of scale. But we still have a long ways to go to make these technologies useful for K through 12, kindergarten to secondary school. Which leads me to the fourth point, and that has to do with innovation in general. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot of courage in order to innovate and to do things differently than they have been done for many years before. Mm-hmm. And for people like you and others who are exploring an innovative landscape, looking for different ways to do things that technology permits, sometimes requires an uphill battle with people who are accustomed to doing things the old way. And so I'm really happy to have this conversation with you about doing things differently.
Thank you for that response. And I'm actually going to be touching in many of those points that you mentioned. But before that, I would like to ask you a question, also following the comparison that I understand that you don't like, but I want to follow the comparison for one thing, because the printing press allowed people to print all kinds of things. No, internet also allows falsehoods, lies, and malice to spread. No, the difference probably is that the internet environment does it immediately and globally. No, so it can cause serious threats to, for example, democracy. No, so how do we fight fake news? No, and what does the father of the internet? And sorry again for the comparison, but how does the father of the internet propose to confront these threats?
Well, first of all, I do agree that the printed page and the internet have several things in common, not the least of which is that the page doesn't know what's printed on it.
Yeah.
The internet doesn't know what's printed on it. And it was designed that way. It was deliberately a sort of a flat platform on which anyone could convey any digitized information at all. That was a design principle. Which has led exactly to your point, which is we've dropped the barrier of access to expression. And with systems like Google's indexing of the World Wide Web, the discovery of information, both of which are very important. We want people to share information. We want people to discover information. The problem is that there's nothing in this technology that prevents us from sharing misinformation and disinformation and even harmful information like malware or ransomware or other kinds of things, or denial of service attacks. I mean, the list is very long. Well, most government systems are intended to protect citizens from harm. And the same argument can be made not only for the printing of harmful material, but also the publication or propagation of harmful material in the online world. So governments seek to protect citizens from harm by introducing rules of the road that you could make a comparison with driving cars, where we have rules about how you drive cars. We don't have an internet license that you have to earn yet, but I can imagine an internet driver's license making a certain amount of sense, particularly if we want people to understand the potential hazards that they might face in an online environment. In particular, misinformation and disinformation or other harmful expression. The problem that we run into is that the internet is global in scope. And so a perpetrator could be in one jurisdiction and a victim in another, which means there has to be cross-jurisdiction cooperation in order to track down perpetrators. This also suggests to me that pure and absolute anonymity is not helpful here. We really need for there to be consequences for harmful behaviors, but that means we have to identify the parties who are behaving badly, and in order to visit the consequences of their bad behavior on them, which means we are going to have to cooperate to track people down, or organizations down, or, to be quite frank, governments down that are doing harm using the internet platform. That's going to require a certain amount of global cooperation. And I would point out that the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has proposed a digital cooperation program, which is intentionally international in scope, with the intent of finding ways of suppressing harmful behaviors while enhancing the ability of the internet to produce constructive results.
Yeah, I mean, regulation in a global scale is very, very difficult. We are also seeing this with other environmental issues. And I mean, those are two big threats to democracy, you know, but also globalization has its opportunities. At a university, we know well, you can become a global entrepreneur and succeed in the worldwide competitive landscape by working remotely. at the Internet Society that you co-founded, you have also been concerned about connectivity in remote communities. No? By reducing the accessibility gap, we will be able to educate, give entrepreneurial opportunities. So of what do you feel prouder, no? when you see this mission accomplished, or at least close to be accomplished?
Well, first of all, pride implies that I did something, and I want to make sure that you appreciate that it's everybody else doing something that I'm happy about, constructive things. Anyway.
I'm referring to you as all the team that you represent.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So a couple of things. First of all, getting everyone online has been a desire of mine, an aspiration of mine, literally for almost 50 years now. And of course, the gap is still there. But the gap is not just accessibility in the physical sense of having access to Wi-Fi or access to broadband, or having a laptop or a desktop or a mobile. You also have to know how to use it. You also have to be able to find useful information. So it needs to be locally useful. It needs to be in a language that you speak. It needs to be maintained. It needs to be discoverable. And you need to be able to distinguish useful information from bad information, which leads me to return to your earlier question and suggest to you that teaching people how to think critically about what they find on the internet is pretty important. They need to ask questions like, where did this information come from? Is there any corroborating evidence for claims that are being made? Who put this information up there, and why did they do that? And are they trying to get me to do something that I would otherwise not want to do? So we need people to think critically about what they're seeing and hearing. I would say the same thing of printed books. And of television and radio and newspapers and magazines and what you hear from your friends.
Yeah.
So this all is about learning to make use of and to discover useful information and to reject useless information.
Yeah.
It requires some training. And of course, the internet can help us with that once you're online.
Yeah, I mean, critical thinking, in a broader sense, probably the humanities is something that I want to touch today with you, because I know you're very sensible to this. But before moving into that topic, I mean, you're also chief internet evangelist, no, at Google. And in line with this question, what do you think we should do with the 40% of the people that are not yet connected, no, which is a big percentage? Yeah.
It is indeed. And I think that there I would say that there are trends at the moment which lead towards essentially full connection for everyone. One of them is continuing reduced cost for the equipment that you need to get online. The second is an increasing investment in technologies that connect you to the internet. 5G is coming. 4G is in some places widely spread already. 5G is coming. 6G is coming. The low Earth orbiting satellites that, like Starlink, for instance, and others like it, are also in operation or are soon to be in operation. Again, allowing access to places that are otherwise very distant from the internet. This is especially a problem in rural parts of most countries. That's certainly true here in the US. In the rural parts of the United States, we still don't have reliable and high-speed internet available, which would be needed in order to make good use of online educational resources. So there's work to be done in terms of investment in infrastructure and driving cost out. But as I say, there are also other barriers that we need to overcome. For example, for people with disabilities, getting access to online information or using any computer-based information is a big challenge, because if they can't see or they can't hear or they have motor problems, these technologies are not helpful until they can be overcome by suitable assistance. And so sometimes that's assistive technologies, whether it's replacing sound with captions or speaking a web page, for instance, that you can't see, but having voiced interactions with it, or even just having voiced interaction completely if you happen to not be able to read or write, but you can speak a language and you can hear it. So there's a lot of work to be done to make these things more accessible. Yeah. And that means training programmers who are making the applications to be much more aware of how to make things accessible.
Yeah. Thank you, Vinton. Allow me to get a bit philosophical now. At IE University, we see the world through liquid learning. I mean, in the time we are living, we live in a world in constant change, so we need to be flexible and adapt very quickly. The pre-Socratic Greek philosopher Heraclitus, obsessed with understanding the meaning of the universe, believed that the key to everything was change. For him, everything changes, nothing remains. Everything is fluid. We will never swim twice in the same river. So liquid learning is our response for academia in the world we live in which we use technology to humanize education, allowing our students to enhance their academic and life experiences through technology, to improve their physical interaction, because technology is here to serve us. So there's a big debate today on the future of education and if it's going to look, and how it's going to look like in 10 years' time. Content has always been there since probably the Alexandria library, but we yet must decide how we convert it into an experience that is useful and fun for the students. So how do you see face-to-face educational interaction in the close future?
So let me make a couple of observations about the way people learn things. For one thing, I'm seeing what I will call just-in-time learning happening more and more often. People turn to Facebook or they turn to Google or they turn to YouTube in order to find things out. And I've had this experience myself where I've gone to YouTube and I've said, how do I do X? Like, how do I prepare Chinese eggplant? And I get back 10 videos that tell me how to do that. So we're seeing a lot of people turning to these online resources when they need help. And what's interesting about that phenomenon is that the help is very relevant because it's being asked for exactly when you need it. And of course, the response is coming exactly when it is needed. And so learning is not something that you just do in the early years of your life. Learning is something that you need to do for all of your life for exactly the reason you pointed out, which is things keep changing. You need to learn new things in order to stay relevant. Imagine for a moment a child born in this year, 2021, might live until the same time in September of 2022, 100 years. And that child might have a working lifetime of 70 years or more, maybe 80 years. Mm-hmm. It's pretty clear that just going to school during the first 20 years of your life is not going to be enough to prepare you to be useful for another 80 years after that. And so we are going to have to keep learning, which means that institutions like yours will have to treat everyone, regardless of age, as students, because they will need to learn new things. Mm-hmm. And so even our definition of student, which often suggests young person, is going to have to change and to recognize that we need to reach people at all ages. And we have to recognize that people can't drop everything and go back to school on a permanent basis or on a continuous basis. You can't just drop everything and have another 4-year degree. So even if we do intensive education at the beginning of a person's life, we're going to have to facilitate learning all through the rest of their lives. Online tools are wonderful ways to achieve that objective. And I believe we will see a significant shift, even in the university setting, towards preparing material that will help people learn things when they need to learn them.
Yeah. I heard you're an amazing cook, so I'm really looking forward to tasting those eggplants at some stage. But besides this, you're touching a very important point about lifelong learning. And besides lifelong learning itself, we're living in a moment in which reskilling is very important. Another thing that we realized, that before the pandemic, although it has been exponentially accelerated with COVID, is that there's a huge skills gap. STEM-oriented professionals are enormously valued in comparison to less updated profiles that need to be urgently reskilled. At IE University, we created a school that mixes the human sciences with technology, to face this threat more than 10 years ago. But how do you envision that we can reskill the workforce in a short period of time, given the need of reinvention, of urgent reinvention, to be honest? No?
Well, so this is indeed a big challenge. For example, if we think about automation and new technologies that do things without benefit of human labor, then we clearly need to take those people and reskill them and reteach them so they can do something new. Whenever you invent new technologies like the one that we're using right now, new jobs are created because these technologies don't run themselves. Somebody has to write the software, somebody has to operate the system, somebody has to maintain the underlying infrastructure, and that requires new learning and new training. The real question, of course, is, are the people whose jobs might have been replaced capable of doing the new jobs? Can they be trained to do the new jobs? Do they want to do the new jobs? And so we have to build into our society, I think, an increased awareness of the value of learning new things. Mm-hmm. This is work. And for a lot of people, I don't want to learn anything new. I know how to do my job. I've been working this way for the last 20 years. Don't bother me. But we have to say, well, doing it the old way may not work very much longer. And it's very important for you to want to learn new things. So we have to reward people for learning. And your point earlier, which was trying to make learning fun, is a kind of reward, in addition to the purely practical point that if you learn how to do this, then we have a job for you. Yeah. But making learning fun and interesting is very important. And that's where teachers come in. Yeah. Because teachers can be guides to new learning. And they can create this atmosphere of enjoyment of learning new things and of sharing new ideas. But that takes real skill all by itself to create that kind of attitude. And so there's not only the technical side of things, the facts that need to be taught, but also this atmosphere and this, I will call it, social meme of wanting to learn.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I mean, and this allows me to make you a question. That's something I know it's very important for you, no? Because in a world where artificial intelligence is so present in our day-to-day lives, no? At IE and yourself and everybody probably believes, no, in the unique power of the humanities, no, to better understand ourselves, the community that we belong to, and the broader society, no. So how do you feel about the humanities in this world? And I mean, you just mentioned, no, but I would like to hear from you, because I know you're passionate about the humanities.
Well, and I'll be speaking on this topic, in fact, at a supercomputing conference coming up in November. This whole subject of digital humanities. First of all, you can't understand your own society if you don't appreciate and learn about the humanities, if you don't read literature, if you don't read philosophy. There's more to the world than just technically understanding how it works. And understanding people's thinking and what motivates them is equally important. So I'm a huge fan of the humanities. Now, let me just say, though, that connecting computing and humanities is turning out to be really interesting. The ability to understand text, for example, is enhanced amazingly by having computational power. So I'm sure you've heard the term computational X for various values of X: computational physics, computational chemistry, computational biography, computational linguistics. Yeah. So as an example, a good friend of mine is the director of the Folger Shakespeare Library, but he's a great user of computer power to understand Shakespeare. He did an analysis of all of Shakespeare's plays, and he discovered that 3 words, if, and but. Those three very simple words in the English language can be used to figure out which of the three types of plays are being are written. The plays break up into histories, tragedies, and comedies.
Yeah.
And it turns out that they differ in their use of those three words sufficiently that if you look at the word count for if, and but, you can tell which of the genres that particular play belongs to, which is nothing short of amazing.
Yeah.
But we can also use artificial intelligence and machine learning to identify certain styles. So that means if we found a text and we don't know where it came from, we may be able to figure out which author it was based on analyzing and building machine learning models of the various authors' styles and use of vocabulary. So I almost feel like computing is a way of having a linguistic microscope to look at texts and to understand them in deeper ways than we otherwise could.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is another reason why machine learning is so important. We're using it to do translation from one language to another. Yeah. And if there was ever a way to understand another culture, it is to read its literature. Yeah. And if you don't happen to speak the language, then good translations may help you appreciate that culture better. And the computers can help us with that.
Yeah. Let me mention very quickly the two founders of EnlightED, Telefónica and iUniversity, are very, very concerned about this. Telefónica is actually working on using AI to see if the Spanish language is being used correctly. And in addition to this, we have also a research center that's called Lyrics, where we are also studying AI applied to language. So this is something that we feel very, very close. No? But let me ask you a last question. I'm very, very concerned about your time. No? Very quickly. In the educational arena, we are big lovers, no, I mean, yourself, because I heard you and us about the concept of learning by doing, no? I would like to ask you, I know it's a huge question, but very briefly, you know, what would you do to redesign the educational system, which is very similar in many countries, to be honest, but just a couple of hints to understand how we can redesign the educational system looking forward.
Well, Montessori teaches us a great deal about how learning by doing is far more effective, I think, than being told about something. Don't read about science. Do science in order to understand it. That's why we have chemistry laboratories. That's why we have electronics laboratories where you actually try things out and apply what it is that you've learned. So a good example of this in Germany is that there is an apprentice system which has been around for ages. It never went away. And so even when you're in college, for example, you may actually work a couple of days a week applying what you've learned to the job that you're working on. And discovering the utility of what you've learned is terribly important. And that's why the just-in-time learning is so effective, because you know the utility of what you've learned immediately because you were trying to solve a problem. Yeah. So being able to apply what you've learned as early as possible, as opposed to trying to imagine 20 years from now, why do I need to solve a calculus problem, will make a big difference in terms of instilling in you an appreciation for the value of what you're learning. How does it get applied? It's like cooking. Watching somebody cook is not the same as actually doing it yourself and making mistakes. Yeah. And so that's the last point I want to make here, is that making mistakes is one of the most powerful ways of learning that I can think of. It's sort of like, oh, that didn't work. And the question is, why not? Yeah. And once you can answer why not, now you've really learned something.
Absolutely. Vinton, thank you so much for your time. It has been very, very insightful. And thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, de nada, as I would say, if I were conversant in Spanish, which I'm not, and I'm embarrassed about that.
We hope to have you in Spain very soon.
Well, I look forward to a return. And of course, I have a particular special place in my heart for an area of Spain called Priorato, because the wines there are wonderful.
Amazing wines. Absolutely agree. Well, very nice having you here, Vinton. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much for this wonderful chat.
Bye-bye.